It truly is an honor to be here. And I mean that not just because of what Smart Girl Politics are doing, but because of the spirit of what tonight is about. Remembering God in our tribute and in our memorial to 9/11 and what happened. I remember where I was on September 11th, and again, like Lorraine was saying, so many of you have more powerful stories than I, so I won't go into the account. I was living on Capitol Hill at the time, but a day or two after the horrific attack on our country, I was asked to come up to New York to participate in an NBC televised town hall forum for students to try to explain what was going on. So I came up here and I decided to take a walk down to the World Trade Center. And it was only a day or two after the attacks, so the blockade was not up, and the streets were still very much open. And I remember walking past that and watching our first responders looking for bodies. I remember the silhouette of the skeleton of the building. I remember especially as I walked, as many of you who visited it recently, within the few days afterwards, I remember as I walked, my feet would kick up, about an inch of gray ash. And it was a very overwhelming feeling as I thought, these are human ashes. These are the ashes of someone's mother, father, brother, sister. And I was struck with such a powerful urgency to fight for our country. And I think so many of us were. And that's why the 9/12 America, the September 12th America, would be appalled at any future administration that would merely suggest that those murderers deserve the same constitutional rights as the people they murdered. The 9/12 America would be appalled at the thought that on the 10-year anniversary, clergy would be excluded.
Right. Yeah.
And it would be, one of the things that appalled me so much about that is that the backlash was not strong enough to force Bloomberg into rescinding that decision. So many of us were angry, but our anger didn't bring about change, and it's a helpless feeling. And I remember again how I felt walking through those streets, feeling almost as if I was trespassing on these people's graves. And when I went on that town hall, when I spoke about the bravery of our troops, and I talked about how courageous President Bush's speech was, nobody booed me, nobody booed the military, nobody would even question whether or not our defense budget should give them every resource that they need to defend our country. And here we are just 10 years later. That's some of our presidential candidates' platform. So many of our men and women are serving overseas in those hostile areas, defending our country, defending our freedoms. We here, back in America, need to make sure the country they come home to is worth coming home to.
Yes, yes.
Which brings me to the main point of why I came here tonight. So many of us know the phrase that, until I had to quote it in the book, I thought was Edmund Burke. The only thing necessary for evil to prevail is for good men, and women, to do nothing. But if you're like me, you're probably asking yourself, well, what about when those good men and women are tired, or a little bit war-weary, or broke, or just flat out exhausted? Then what? Well, I find not only our country at a crossroads, but this movement at a crossroads. And it is difficult to continue going when we find ourselves overwhelmed with that feeling of helplessness. Will there be a breakthrough? When will it come? Well, I want to remind ourselves of the great victories we have had recently. Whether it's, Time magazine trying to say that this movement has reached its peak, or whether it's Maxine Waters saying that the Tea Party can go to hell, or Joe Biden, my former senator, vice president from my own state, calling us terrorists, and especially in honor of what tonight is all about, I find that especially appalling.
Right.
As we find ourselves at this crossroad, and our country as a crossroad, I believe that the hope for America lies in this middle-class movement that is propelling this indeed second American Revolution. So we have to ask ourselves, are our unalienable rights worth a little alienation from the Beltway in crowd?
Right.
And I say yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. So when we get tired, we must get re-inspired.
Right.
And as I've been on the book tour, doing a lot of radio shows, people are always asking me what I think about the 2012 presidential elections and what's happening. And what they all say is, well, what about this Tea Party movement? What are we going to do about that? Give it a Medal of Honor? What do you mean, what are we going to do about that? I find it appalling that people are blaming us for this debt and for so many of the things that have caused our country to go derailing off the proverbial cliff. And what we have done is keep our leaders in Washington accountable to the next generation. There's a growing discontentment with those leaders in Washington who have turned Congress into a favor factory.
Right.
That's not the vision of America. That's not the vision our founders had. That's not why so many of our men and women are sacrificing their lives. In the book, I talk about bravery. And bravery isn't simply a reckless strength. It's not just doing something, because you're strong or whatever. Bravery is having the courage to value something greater than yourself and then to sacrifice and suffer for it.
Right.
That's what bravery is. And that's who we're honoring tonight, the true brave heroes of not just 9/11, but of America and here in this room. And I define establishment as not just one party or one ideology, but rather the establishment is a mindset, a willingness to compromise in order to get ahead. And it's not something that just plagues the political process. You can find it in your workplace. And in this establishment mindset, there's almost an eagerness to compromise and to step on people in order to get ahead. And right now, as we as a movement find ourselves in a crossroads, one of the things that I keep hearing is that we're going to have to compromise. We're going to have to accept some sort of a solution, a less than, in order to get ahead. And I say absolutely not. And the reason for that is we represent the truth.
Right.
The truth is powerful. The truth is more powerful than any political party. And those with the establishment mindset who are just trying to cozy up to those who have the power, we've got the power. Freedom is inscribed on everyone's heart. That's how God created us.
Right.
So we already know the truth. If somebody is not agreeing with us, we don't abandon the message. We reframe the message because it will resonate with those who might not be with us now. And what our strategy has to be, again, is not abandoning it, but getting better at communicating it. Because what do I mean by freedom is inscribed on everyone's heart? God created us, all of us, with a unique, unrepeatable, precious individual dignity.
Right.
What I mean by unrepeatable preciousness, think of someone that you love. Now, like many Americans, I stand opposed to cloning, but let's say you could clone somebody. Let's say you were able to clone exact voice, exact look, exact DNA, that person that you loved. If it's your spouse, would you go home with the clone? Probably not. If it were a child, would you think you had a spare child because they looked and sounded exactly no. What is it that makes that person, your loved one, different from a clone? It's that unrepeatable preciousness that exists within all of us. And that the economic system of any benevolent society, which America is, needs to empower that individual preciousness, needs to embolden and allow that individual to flourish with their God-given creativity, their God-given talents, to fulfill their own unique calling. That is how freedom is inscribed on everybody's heart. And our longing to be loved just for who we are. We want that to be, that freedom in us wants to be honored. Think of in your workplace, if you're working very hard, going the extra mile, you want your boss to honor that, to appreciate that. You want your hard work, your risk, to be your reward. That is freedom crying out from our hearts. In the feeling of pride that wells up inside of us when you've earned a better life for your family, when your sacrificed vacations and your 100-hour work weeks are providing a better life for your children, that is freedom crying out from your heart. So we do not need to abandon these principles, the principles that made our country great. We need to reframe our message. Now again, I said that an economic system of a benevolent society needs to empower that. And I believe that only in a true free market economy can we empower that. But the reason why we need a moral, as you talked about, more of a moral outcry and more virtuous people involved is because while one can certainly make a case in capitalism or in free market for, there's a market for the sex slave trade. There's a market for prostitution. But is it honoring and is it empowering to the individual? Then it has no place in our free market society. So we need more men and women who honor the individual, who are willing to be brave and sacrifice and suffer in order to empower one another. On the campaign trail, I would ask people, what do you think the American dream is? And I was appalled at how many people did not know. Or what they would say is, to have a house, to have a car. Not quite. The American dream is to work hard to earn a house, to work hard to earn a car. The American dream is that regardless of your background, regardless of your circumstances, you can create a better life. The direct result of your hard work can create a better life for your loved ones and for future generations. That's the American dream. We've got an administration now that is trying to promise everyone a government-subsidized American dream. And it simply doesn't work. By its very definition, you cannot have a government-subsidized shot at the American dream. It will not work. It's like filling up balloons with lead. It's not what they were created for. That's not what freedom is about. That's not what liberty is about. What we need to do to restore America is to continue to empower this middle-class movement to rise up and stand up for the common sense solutions that made our country great and can still make our country great. These are the principles on which our country was founded. This is why America is great. Not because of some party, not because of some set of ideals that a particular party holds, but because of a set of ideas that the Creator put within all of us.
Yes.
And these ideas made America great, and they can still make the world great. And that's what's so beautiful about America, and that this crossroads that we find ourselves. And we have to ask ourselves, are we going to enjoy the same fate as the first American Revolution or the French Revolution, where they simply, after their first surge of victory, exchanged one form of tyranny for another? Because when push came to shove, they found it hard to continue. So, as I close, what I want to do is read for you the closing of the introduction in the book. Because, you know, one thing that I found really fascinating, I just came back from a book tour, is the feedback that I would get from people. And I like to ask people, what do you like about the book? And, you know, whether it's the little fun behind-the-scenes stories, such as, you know, the day of the primary, I was wearing a red Jones, New York jacket. And because I won, that jacket ended up being broadcast literally across the world, on the front page of the New York Times, on the front page of the England newspapers. And so Time magazine was doing a story on the 2010 election. So they said, you know, this is going to be a cover shot, so please wear that red jacket. So the only reason I bring this up is because, you know, one of the things many people liked about the book is that I talked about how I got that red jacket for $6 at a thrift store. You know, so some of these little stories that are peppered throughout there, people find, you know, funny. You know, and I put that in there to say, you know, you don't have, trust me, you don't have to be a millionaire to run for office. You just need to know where to shop. But also other people then gave feedback about the ending of the book. I wrote the book in such a way where the beginning is sort of, you know, more of a narrative, as if you and I were sitting on the couch drinking a cup of tea, and you said, why the heck did you run in the first place? You know, do you have any regrets? What do you think the future of America holds? So the beginning is sort of a narrative, but then I closed it, transitioning into the policy part, where I talk about the freedom food chain. I talk about why socialism is bad. And just real quick little summaries of that, what the freedom food chain, as I try to lay out what I think is the definition of the freedom food chain. Because right now, as the administration sees Obama's ratings plummet, they're trying to say, what's wrong with big government? What's wrong with socialism? Don't you have a heart? So I lay out the case that, like it or not, some freedoms are greater than others. There are lesser and there are greaters. For example, my right to life is greater than Annette's right to drive on the wrong side of the road. No matter how much fun that might be for her, but how do we decide? And who decides? Because those sort of things are not specifically laid out in the Constitution, but what is laid out in the 10th Amendment is that if it's not written in this document, it belongs in the states. So I try to explain why that is, and it's because of trust. Think of if you were going away on vacation, and you needed someone to come in and feed your dog, water your plants. Would you ask some stranger who you might see twice a year if you're very active, very diligent, right into his scheduler, demanding to get into his office? You know, because if something's stolen, something's broken, how are you going to hold him accountable? Or would you ask a neighbor, where if you come home and you find out that your neighbor's kid had a keg party, you're going to see that neighbor mowing his lawn, you're going to see him in the carpool line, you're going to say, hey buddy, I trusted you. You're going to have an accountability. So why would we entrust our freedoms, which are so much more valuable than any earthly possession, why would we trust our freedoms to a cold government federal bureaucracy that we may or may not be able to get into and see. The decision-making as to which freedoms are greater than others needs to be local because of that. Because we need to be able to hold them accountable if we don't like what they decided. And it needs to be easily undoable, easily reversed. What we see happening right now with the federal government taking ownership and taking control of so much of our daily lives, it's too big of a beast. And we cannot let it get so far, because then America will become a socialist economy. And I talk about the chapter, the power of the soundbite, why there's a fundamental flaw with socialism. I have a good friend of mine, she and her husband lead a ministry, and she and I were talking, and she said, "But if you can get good leaders to run a socialist economy, isn't that a good thing? I mean, what's wrong with government taking care of its people?" And I said, that's what is so deceptive about that, because it sounds good. But the problem with socialism, even if you can, which is unrealistic, even if you can get so-called good leaders to take care of their people and run a benevolent socialist society, is it snuffs out the individual. And that unrepeatable preciousness and unique gifts that you all have, that I talked about, in a socialist economy, you can't use them. If you already are not from means, it's going to be very difficult to work your way to another level. And it's going to end up being easier to just take the government handout. And most likely, you and your children and the next generation will remain dependent on a government. And I believe that that is a wicked attitude, because it does not empower and honor that unique individual. So that's why there's a fundamental flaw with socialism. Because under socialism, the individual exists to serve the government. It should be that the government exists to serve the individual. So with that, I tried to lay out what is an easy, convincing argument for what we need to arm ourselves with, the truth, how to articulate the truth going into 2012, because I truly believe that 2012 can make or break our country. It's such an important election. Oh, I started telling you about what's in the book because of the different things that people have commented on. But as people comment on the anecdote about the red jacket or the freedom food chain or why socialism is bad, one of the things they all comment on is the introduction. So that's why I chose to close with reading the introduction to you. Oh, before I get that, I see Annette standing in the back wanting to, she's waving, wanting me to remind you that we're selling the books for $20, and $5 of your contribution buying the book goes back to Smarkle Politics tonight. So it's a way to help two groups. We're giving it to you at cost, and then what's above cost goes back to Smarkle Politics. But also, if you can sign up to be on the Christine Pack list, because what we're doing next is fighting back. If you remember, if your opponent cannot stand on their platform or their message, because again, we're standing on the truth, they're standing on deception. They fight with the politics of personal destruction. And in my race, we had the George Soros funded group Crew actually file a false claim against me the day after I won the primary. Now, ultimately, 10 months later, all of those legal claims that have been lobbed against me have been dismissed, but they do this as a political weapon, so that during the election, the headlines read, O'Donnell being investigated by the U.S. Attorney's Office. Because the reason for that is, whenever you file a claim, whether it's legitimate or not, with the U.S. Attorney's Office, they're obligated into it. Now, in my situation, it never went, past the second stage, because in their investigation, they saw it for the politically motivated nonsense it was. But what Melanie Sloan and crew did is illegal. And I'm not the first candidate that they've done it to. They did it to Sarah Palin. They did it to Tom Coburn. They did it to Jim DeMint. They did it to Sean Hannity. There's a litany of good, true, constitutional conservatives that crew has gone after because George Soros is a proud socialist. He has said numerous times that it's America that stands in the way of a great world. And he has said numerous times, and we've got this all documented at Christine Pack on our website, that the best thing we can do is to devalue the dollar. He wants to bring America to her knees, and he recognizes when candidates stand up against his socialist agenda, and he recognizes when people rally behind that truth. So we are fighting back. And we have filed a series of our own claims against crew. Because what they did was illegal, and if we don't fight back, they're going to continue to abuse the justice system as a political weapon. And going into 2012, there's got to be consequences. So we've done 3 things. We've asked the IRS to revoke their tax-exempt status. Because when George Soros gives millions of dollars to crew so that Melanie Sloan can file her fake legal claims, he gets it written off on his taxes. So we've asked them to revoke their tax status because they've intentionally engaged in political activity. We've asked the U.S. Attorney's Office to pursue criminal charges against Melanie Sloan because it is illegal to knowingly file a false claim. And in our defense fighting back, we actually have an audio tape that we submitted to the U.S. Attorney's Office of the person who filed the false affidavit around which her whole claim was centered. We have him admitting that it was false and that it was perjured, and admitting that he warned Melanie Sloan, and she said, don't worry about it. So she knew that what she was doing was deceptive, but she's so cocky. They're so cocky they think they can get away with it. So the third thing that we've done is we've asked our state attorney general to also do the same thing, to revoke their tax status and to locally pursue criminal charges because her activity was done in Delaware. Now, our state attorney general is Joe Biden's son. So I'm sure we're going to get a fair shot there. But we're fighting back. And that is the great thing. So if you want to stay involved, if you want to stay up on that, we're having a raffle tonight, free raffle for when you sign up at Christine Beck to give away one of the books. So see Annette in the back. Now I'll get back to it. She's really good at what she does because as she sees me about to conclude, she's like, don't forget to tell them to sign up. So I'm going to read to you the last part of the introduction. I believe that the American values enshrined in our Constitution and in our Declaration of Independence are not mere relics from the past, but the landing lights on a clear path to a strong and secure future. I believe that these core values were worth fighting for then, and they're worth fighting for today. There are more of us than there are of them. The same principles that made our country great will keep our country great. And if we err, let it be on the side of liberty. If we stumble, let us pick ourselves up and press on. If we benefit, let it be from working hard and saving smart. Let us meet our obligations to God and neighbor by way of our own hearts and checkbooks, rather than some cold government bureaucracy. Let us entrust our nation to public servants who serve the public rather than themselves, and who place the next generation above the next election. Let America make peace in our world and on our borders through strength, friendship, commerce, and good common sense. These are the values and principles that built and can still rebuild a great nation. But it wasn't easy then, and it won't be easy now. We will be resisted, but we must resist as well. And so I ask you to join me tonight in taking the same pledge as the first generation of dissenters took. They only saw Lexington and Concord. They didn't see the dynasty of dissent that they were founding. They couldn't see Gettysburg, Normandy, or Fallujah. And what was required of them, though, is still required of us, and will no doubt be required of our children and our children's children. But they still took that pledge together, and that pledge closes the Declaration of Independence. The pledge, that same pledge, will preserve this, the last best hope for our planet. So let us pledge now, as they did then, to one another and to posterity, for the sake of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Let us pledge our very lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. May God ever bless America. God bless you.